Welcome back, bienvenue, and all that jazz. It's time to talk about my 5 favorite and least favorite reads from Q1 of 2023. I like to just kind of do these lists because the end of year, like top 10 lists, kind of leave out a lot of books when you read on average somewhere around 100 books a year. So I'm only talking about 10% of my reads. And this way I get to talk about a little bit more of like the current faves / least faves as we kind of go through the year. So the way that this is going to work is I will go in alternating order of a favorite and then a least favorite and then a favorite and then a least favorite back and forth. And I will start with my most like middle of the road fave and least fave. And then at the end, it will be my very much least fave and fave. So you'll have to stay tuned if you want to know the best and worst. But with that being said, let's jump straight in. So we have 10 books to talk about today. So first we'll talk about my most middle of the road least fave, and this is the only DNF I've had in Q1, and that was The Tyranny of Faith by Richard Swan, book 2 in the Empire of the Wolf, book 1 being Justice of Kings. And I don't think that this book is bad per se, you know what I mean? Like sometimes you just think a book is terrible, and this one I just was bored. Like the very beginning of the book started with this cool like necromancy, demon cult, like things that I found really intriguing, and then we kind of went into this kind of mundane kidnapping plotline that had a whatever resolution, and I got 80% of the way into this book and I just was like, I don't care. And so it is the only DNF I've had this year. And so that just gives you a sense of the sheer level of ambivalence I feel for this book. So for people who love Justice of Kings and Tyranny of Faith, love that for you. It's just not what I want. When I'm reading a fantasy mystery or a murder mystery, I want there to be fantasy and not to be part of the mystery, you know what I mean? And for Tyranny of Faith, it was just not it. Like the kidnapping plotline was so boring. So then we'll swap this and we'll balance this with my least fave of my most faves. And so I have it somewhere. So that would be The Priory of the Orange Tree by Samantha Shannon. This is the first standalone in this series of standalones. It sounds like she's trying to write at least 1 or 2 more, and the most recent one, A Day of Fallen Night, came out in February, but I didn't read it until April, so it's not on this list. But The Priory of the Orange Tree is such a good time. It has such a nice balance of expansive world building and politics, but it's not too dense. We have great characters. We have slow burn sapphic romance. We have dragons everywhere, and kind of creepy dragons that have like elements of like almost mind control-ish powers and creepy plague type things and kind of questing for a magic sword and just like everything that I kind of love in fantasy, all in one fully complete thought in one book, which is so rare. So I had such a good time with The Priory of the Orange Tree. I know a lot of people don't love it or are intimidated by it because she's chonky, but I will say, if you like things similar to me, I would highly recommend you check out Priory of the Orange Tree. It's just so much fun. Like, I think it is exactly what you want it to be, and it doesn't overstay its welcome. I do have a few complaints. It was only a 4.5 star read because from the climactic bits, I kind of wanted a little bit more. Like, the climax kind of happened relatively quickly after a lot of build-up. But I still was not mad with where anything ended up, and I just had such a fun time reading it. There's also like a secret mage society kind of behind the scenes who knows more information. It's just, so much fun. Then swapping back to not so faves, I'll talk about The Frugal Wizard's Guide to Surviving Medieval England, and this is Secret Project number 2 by Brandon Sanderson. I won't talk about this one too much because I do have a whole spoiler-free review video that I'll link for you if you're interested in more thoughts specifically on this one. It was just so not what I wanted. I didn't expect kind of a portal sci-fi that felt kind of like Jason Bourne vibes. It was just not what I was interested in, and I wanted like an actual wizard situation and magic, and to see what Brandon Sanderson could do with magic that was not Cosmere, and that is not The Frugal Wizard's Guide. It is very much like an action flick in book form, and it was fun enough for what it was, but it was just like kind of a letdown, and so I gave it 3.5 stars. Like, it's not bad by any means. It's just kind of mass appeal, action-packed sci-fi, which is just not my jam. And so it's kind of a miss for me, which was disappointing. But then we'll balance out the disappointment with another fave, and that would be Witch Hat Atelier by Kamome Shirahama. And I think specifically probably volumes like 8 through 10 I just really loved. So this is a fantasy manga that I got into because Elle from Elliot Brooks was screaming about it for days. And so I wanted to pick it up because I've been wanting to get back more into manga recently. And so I decided to try it. And it has these adorable, almost like magic school vibes. We're following a protagonist who is in love with being a wizard and wants to be one so badly, but in this world, the witches and wizards are supposed to be born with magic, and she was not born with magic. Things ensue, things happen, and it starts so wholesome and sweet and cute, and the friendship dynamics and just everything is so precious, and the art is beautiful. And then before you know it, like towards the end, we're hitting on some really deep, dark themes, and you start questioning, like, who is the bad guy here? What is right in this situation? Like, it has so much more nuance than I was expecting from how it started. And it was just a magical time, and I can't wait for volume 11 to come out in the summer, I think. It was just so much fun and so good. And then there was just some heart-touching moments and some heart-wrenching moments, and I'm concerned for our characters. So I would highly, highly recommend, like, if you want to dip a toe into manga, but you're kind of intimidated by some of these longer series that are like hundreds or dozens and dozens of volumes in length, then Witch Hat is the perfect kind of place to start, because it kind of pays homage to some of the really popular manga and anime kind of tropes, but it does it in its own way. So like, if you really like things about it, I think that there are lots of manga, depending on what you like, that you can then delve into. But it's also only 10 volumes right now, so it's not the biggest commitment, because each volume probably takes like 30 to 45 minutes to read. And so reading all 10 volumes is probably like reading one novel. So I would highly recommend, if you're at all intrigued, you should definitely give Witch Hat Atelier a try, because it is so good. Now, bringing the energy back down. This book I did not hate again. It is just so aggressively mid to me, and that is The Empire of Silence by Christopher Rocchio, book 1 in the Sun Eater saga. And I did not know going in. I didn't find out until I was chatting with the author a little bit on Discord, and he mentioned that Empire of Silence is basically a long prologue, which I'm also kind of like, why did you need a 750-page prologue? But the setup felt very Dune. We were following like the son of an important guy who kind of is part of ruling a planet, and like, it just, there was even things where, like, in Dune the phrase is fear is the mind killer. In Empire of Silence, it's fear is the death of reason. Like, it is literally like wearing its kind of inspirations on its sleeve, which is fine, but also I don't necessarily love kind of slice of life coming of age type stories, because the setup for Empire of Silence is very like Interview with the Vampire or Empire of the Vampire or Name of the Wind. It's that trope of somebody telling you their story, and usually when that's happening, I feel like we get some of the modern day perspective and then the flashback kind of telling story pieces. But Empire of Silence kind of was lacking that more robust narrative structure, where we were bouncing back to the future to kind of see where the main character Hadrian is at now. So we were really just following him as kind of a boy, his dynamics with his brother and his father, why he left his initial planet, what happened to him on the planet that he ended up at. And then we start getting into some of the interesting kind of mystery of ancient alien races and who actually was exploring space first, and just like interesting kind of weird alien stuff. But that didn't start kicking off until probably 2/3 into the book. So there was a lot of slow build up, a lot of just kind of mundane stuff, which I guess if you really connect with Hadrian, I could see why people would love it. But just like, I did not really care about Hadrian, and so it just felt kind of like a drag. And so I gave it 3 stars. It was fine. And I might try book 2. I hear book 2 is where it starts to get really into the weird alien stuff, which was like the parts of book 1 that I liked. So we'll see. If you're somebody who loves Sun Eater and you understand my complaints, please let me know if you think that this series is worth me continuing, or if you just think it's not a series for me. Please help. And then we'll balance it out with another favorite, and I have it somewhere. Whatever. I can't find it. So up next is Nolan by Michael J. Sullivan. This is book 1 of the Rise and Fall trilogy, which is kind of neatly sandwiched in between the sextet that is the Legends of the First Empire, and then the Ryuria books. So the Rise and Fall is kind of bridging the 3,000 year ago Legends of the First Empire, and then kind of catching us up to where we're at in Ryuria. And so I've read the first 2 books in the Rise and Fall. Book 1, Nolan, we get to see a lot of the offspring and a lot of the characters that we grew to know and love from Legends in Nolan. And I think that's where its magic shined, because it was really just kind of getting another chance to be with some of my characters that I loved from that original series. So I think that's where Nolan shined for me, and kind of starting to see how Michael J. Sullivan is really twisting the history that we know the events of Legends, and just seeing how that's starting to get shifted more and more the deeper we get into the rise and fall. And I hear that it's even like more ridiculously warped by the time we get to the Rhaeria books, and so I'm just kind of just thriving on that. And then the game of playing where in the world is that certain character is so much fun. So Nolan, I think it was just like the perfect adventure moment to recall the legends of the First Empire that I had such a fun time with. I would definitely say that you don't want to start with Nolan if you've never read Michael J. Sullivan before. I would say if you want to do pub order, you would start with the Rhaeria Revelations. And I do hear that if you read Legends first, it maybe takes some of the impact out of Rhaeria, because the kind of reveals you will know are coming because you have outsider information. So take that for what you will. I am personally reading these books in world chronological order, and I'm having a blast with it so far. But we'll see how I feel by the time I get to the first published series, the Rhaeria Revelations, if I feel similarly to other people. I don't know. But so far, I'm just thriving, enjoying it. Michael J. Sullivan does really classic fantasy races and just does slight twists and enough on them that they are feeling fresh, and it still is like classic adventure fantasy that I love, but with more modern characters, and just so good. So I would highly recommend you check out Michael J. Sullivan if you haven't already, but do not start with Nolan. Then my second least fave of the quarter was Another Dimension of Us by Mike Albo. I gave this guy 2.75 stars, and it is young adult, queer, male romance science fiction. But the male romance is a stretch because you really don't see these characters interact on page. It's kind of like the setup of Stranger Things, where you're seeing the kind of obsessive teeny love of the more openly gay character for like his friend, and then his friend kind of ends up in an alternate dimension, and we're going on a quest to find his friend. That's kind of the gist. It's also very 80s, so it is very like Stranger Things inspired, but if the Upside Down was more bizarre and less just creepy. So and that's just not what I was expecting, and I don't know why necessarily we're trying to be like super 80s and young adult, because I'm like, these kids weren't alive anywhere near the 80s, or are these references even relevant? I don't know. It just felt very like, who is this for? And then since I went into it thinking it was going to be a male romance, and then it was really like them never being together, him like going on an adventure to try to find this guy, it was just like fine. And then there's kind of two plot lines. There was like the future people and the past people, and then we kind of met in the weird alternate dimension and just shenanigans. So if that sounds good, I would say check it out. Like, I don't think it was bad. It was just so not what I wanted and not for me. Then my second fave of the quarter was The Battle Drum by Sarah El-Arifi. This is book 2 in the Ending Fire trilogy, book 1 being The Final Strife. And The Final Strife feels very much like if we took kind of dystopian tropes, kind of a la Hunger Games, and put them in a more intense fantasy world where our caste system is based on the color of blood, and there are some really graphic things that happen in this series. So if you have any kind of trigger warnings, I would highly recommend you seek them out, because there are some quite intense things that happen on page. And just the battle drum though, like, you felt kind of contained in the Final Strife, and then there were some reveals at the end where you're like, huh. And then the battle drum just like blew it all up. Like, so many cool reveals, and it was one of those plots where it was so twisty and turny, and you're just like trying to make theories on what's happening and who's who and how is this connected, and like what time frame is this plot arc in versus this plot arc. And then like I was buddy reading this with Jashana, so we were just like constantly sending theories back and forth and being like, oh, did you see this? How about this? And like, just the way everything wove together, and even things in book 1, like this trilogy was so clearly planned out from the beginning that there are so many like little nuggets that you can find in book 1 that hint at things in book 2, and then it was so much fun and just intense and fast-paced, and things that you couldn't guess but made sense, and things that you could put together if you were really paying attention. Just phenomenal. I cannot recommend the Ending Fire trilogy highly enough. Now I'm just sad because I think book 2 isn't actually published until May. Jashana and I both got advanced reading copies of it, but now I have to wait for book 3, and I am sad. So, Sarah, you should hurry up and write this. Not like you're ever watching my channel, but that book was such a fun reading experience. Then my least favorite book of the quarter surprising nobody, was White Noise by Don DeLillo. I gave this book, I think originally I said 2.75, but it's probably more like a 2.5 or maybe 2.25. I don't know. It's not the book for me. It is a literary fiction book that is kind of trying to have this kind of satirical look at humanity, and it kind of is this really intensely overwritten story, and it's splitting up into parts, and like the first part we're kind of just like being really dramatic and looking at kind of poking fun at how seriously people take mundane things. So we follow characters grocery shopping or just complaining around the table or whatever. And then part 2, there's this kind of weird nuclear event and kind of seeing society's response to that. And then book 3 is a lot more about the interpersonal relationships between our main character and his wife. And it just is not for me. Like, the level of overwriting kind of like ruined it for me, and I really kind of semi-enjoyed part 1, but then when we got to parts 2 and 3, like part 2 was so long, and then part 3, I was just like, what is even why? And just, no. I need to be much more selective the next time I try to pick up a literary fiction. I'm not writing off the genre, because I don't think obviously it's all this kind of overwritten stuff. I think that there probably are some things in lit fic that I might like more, but White Noise was not it. And then my favorite book of the month, or not of the month, of the quarter. Can you guess what it is? Before I show it, why don't you, if you have any idea what you think my favorite book of Q1 was, please let me know in the comments down below, because I'm just really curious what you think it is. So I've given you your moment, and now I'll tell you. My favorite book of quarter 1 was Tress of the Emerald Sea. I read this release day. I have a full spoiler-free review video of Tress of the Emerald Sea as well, and I just had so much fun. And there's also a spoiler-filled chat, because this was part of the kickoff for the Great Cosmere-a-thon that's going for the next couple of years with me, Angela from the Literature Science Alliance, and Stephanie from Miss Richards Reads. And so I will link both the spoiler-free review from me and our spoiler-filled chat for Tress. And this is just the fun, whimsical, adult sci-fi fairy tale that I didn't know that I needed, but I'm so happy it exists. And if you like kind of fairy tale vibes with that kind of snarky fourth wall breaking character at all, then I would highly recommend you check out Tress of the Emerald Sea. I will say it does have a lot of Brandon's humor, but I think it's a different style on his humor that I'm used to. It's not like Era 2 of Mistborn. This humor hit a lot more for me, because it was a lot more of the snarky, sassy kind of narrator. But like, it's just so good. I don't think that you want to know that much going into it. Just go in and have a whimsical, fun time, and you'll thank me later. But that does it for my favorite and least favorite reads of quarter 1. Please let me know in the comments down below what were some of your favorites or least favorites from January through March. And if you just want to leave an emoji, leave a teacup for Tress. And if you know, you know. But that will do it for today's video. Please like this video if you liked it. Subscribe if you haven't for more bookish shenanigans like this from moi. Other than that, I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll talk to you again soon. Bye!